Okay, now we're going to be talking about different kinds of research methods, and we're going to start with descriptive research. And obviously the goal for descriptive research is to describe. And so in this case, you're not making any conclusions, really. You're not making any predictions. You're just observing a phenomenon, observing a group, observing whatever it is that you want to do. Now, you're taking careful observations and you are taking careful measurements, but you're not necessarily trying to explain why, you're just describing. So, for example, one type of way of doing this is naturalistic observation. You might observe some animals in a natural habitat. You might be observing children in a daycare center. You're making observations and taking measurements of what you are observing and just essentially describing what you see. Surveys and interviews are another way of doing descriptive research. Surveys, you're just asking people questions and getting their responses and recording their responses and kind of like assessing what they say. Interviews are kind of similar to surveys except they're done face to face. Take more time because it's a one-on-one type of thing. And case studies are in-depth looks at one or a very small group of individuals, gathering as much information as you can about that. And oftentimes there's no specific hypothesis to test. You're just trying to observe and understand a particular phenomenon, just trying to see what's out there. Oftentimes descriptive research can lead to further research, because it allows you to say, gathering this information, well, that information is interesting, I'd like to explore that further. So let's start with naturalistic observation. So here you see a young lady observing this little preschool environment, and she's behind a one-way mirror, so she can see them, but they can't see her, so they don't know they're being observed. The teacher knows, probably, but the children don't know they're being observed. So they're behaving normally. They're not behaving like putting on a show for the camera. But they are being observed by the researcher, and the researcher, as you can see, is taking careful notes about the types of behaviors she is observing. It's systematic. So she did not do this, let's just watch some kids in the preschool. She had a plan for what exactly she was going to look for, what she was going to be recording, and this is essentially what she was doing. Oftentimes, a naturalistic observation is something you can only do if maybe it's too unethical to do an experiment, and really you have to keep people in their environment instead of bringing them over to a laboratory. With observation, you're actually seeing people behaving, especially if you're unobtrusive, if they don't necessarily see you watching them, then you see how they really behave, not what they tell you. What people tell you on a survey may not actually match what they actually do. But with naturalistic observation, you are observing what they do. So the disadvantages is very time consuming. She's going to have to watch this preschool setting here, maybe do it several times over a period of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. I don't know. It may be time consuming. And furthermore, it cannot determine cause and effect. So she might see little Johnny over here behaving aggressively, and she might observe what happened before, what happened after, but she's still not going to be able to say for sure what caused little Johnny to be aggressive. Was Johnny overly tired? Was that a factor? Was Johnny angry for some reason? What made Johnny angry? All these are questions you might be able to ask, but really you can't determine cause and effect. You can just observe. But obviously a lot of great research has started from just naturalistic observation, just observing what people do in their real world environments. Okay, with surveys, again, the data collection is cheap, it's quick, you can send it out to a lot of different people. Online, it can be even more efficient. The problem is some people don't tell the truth when it comes to surveys. You have to be very careful with the wording of the questions. Just changing the wording can actually get people to answer the questions differently. And like with naturalistic observation, you cannot determine cause and effect. Case studies are, again, in-depth examinations of one or two people. And with a case study, oftentimes, you certainly you can't really generalize the entire population with a case study. But it may be an unusual case. It may be a case where there's not a whole lot of, but there's something that's very interesting or compelling about one particular case that you'd want to study more about. So, I guess one example you can think of here would be the Columbine shooters, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. There's a lot that we want to find out about why they went into their high school and shot a bunch of their classmates and teachers. And you really want to kind of get in depth about what you think about their drawings and who their friends were and the things that they said, their recordings, all the stuff. There's a lot of data that you can gather about this particular case that can shed some light perhaps on what was going on here. Again, you're not be able to determine cause and effect, but you can see some of the factors that might be involved and maybe helps you in the future when it comes to understanding why people could do such a thing. Again, you're really only speculating here, but when you're doing the in-depth analysis, you are gathering as much information as you can about it. Also, just I didn't mention interviews as one type of research method. It's similar to a survey, except it's more done one-on-one. There are many interesting examples of of interview research where the researcher would go one-on-one with the subject and ask certain questions. One of the most famous cases was Alfred Kinsey, who was a biologist who published some very famous and controversial research on human sexuality. And he interviewed a whole bunch of volunteers, asking them some very specific, very personal questions about their sex lives, both men and women, and based on their responses, essentially writing a book, Sexual Behavior of the Human Male, Sexual Behavior of the Human Female, which essentially describes what the responses that he got from his subjects in terms of all sorts of sexual behaviors. And it was very controversial at the time. It happened in like the 1940s and 50s. So it was a conservative time sexually, conservative attitudes towards sexuality at the time. And but found a lot of interesting and surprising information about the sexual habits of Americans. And one of the interesting things that he did when he did his research was he was very careful to ask questions in kind of a very unemotional, straightforward way, and no any kind of emotional reactions, no giggling, for example, regarding what the subject responded, even if the subject responded to something that sounded really weird. He had a whole research team that he trained to do the interviewing, and found some very interesting but very controversial research. If you want to see a good movie, there was a biopic done on Kinsey called, the name of the movie was Kinsey, and it starred Liam Neeson as Kinsey, and it was just a really good movie. If you want to go watch it, I highly recommend it.